Millionaire Abandons Wife. 10 years later, he sees her. What drives a man to leave everything behind? What secrets does a broken past hold? When a chance encounter reignites old wounds, can forgiveness be found? Who is the woman he abandoned, and what has she become? In a world of betrayal and regret, can a shattered past be mended? Dive into a tale of lost love and unexpected revelations. Are you ready to uncover the truth? Chapter 1. A glimpse of the past. The airport thrummed with the ceaseless motion of people, luggage wheels clattering on tiles, voices blending into a constant hum, and the occasional sharp call of a boarding announcement. To me, it was all just background noise, a familiar symphony in the life I had built. My eyes swept the terminal, half closed as I swirled the last of my scotch in its glass, the amber liquid catching the light in a way that momentarily held my attention. Tokyo was the destination this time, a city of neon and skyscrapers, where the deal I was about to close would add yet another zero to my already overflowing bank account. But the thrill of the chase, the excitement of another business victory, had long since faded. All that was left was a hollow echo of what once was. My life, for all its success, had become a series of transactions, each one more lucrative, each one leaving me feeling emptier. I was about to signal for another drink when something, or rather someone, caught my eye. It was just a flicker at first, a flash of movement in the sea of travelers. I wouldn't have noticed if not for the way she moved, graceful yet burdened, as if the weight of the world was upon her shoulders. My gaze sharpened, cutting through the haze of detachment that usually clouded my mind. There she was, guiding a young boy through the throng, her hand protectively resting on his small shoulder. She seemed older, her once vibrant energy subdued by time and perhaps by life itself. My heart gave a traitorous lurch as I leaned forward, my breath hitching in my throat. It couldn't be, but the more I stared, the more the fog of disbelief lifted. Megan. The name slipped from my lips, barely audible, but it tasted of regret and longing. She turned slightly, just enough for our eyes to meet across the crowded terminal. My breath caught as recognition flickered in her gaze, only to be quickly extinguished. It was her, Megan, my Megan, the woman I had once promised the world to, only to abandon her with nothing but a hastily written letter. My eyes darted to the boy at her side. He was about 10 years old, and the resemblance was undeniable. His dark hair, the sharp line of his jaw, features that were eerily familiar. My pulse quickened, a cold wave of realization crashing over me. Could he be mine? Could I have left them, without knowing that she carried my child? I watched them from a distance, my body frozen in place, my mind a storm of thoughts I couldn't control. They reached the departure gate, and I saw her kneel beside the boy, speaking softly to him. I strained to hear, desperate for any scrap of information. "Alex, stay close to me, okay? I don't want to lose you in this crowd," she said, her voice carrying a tenderness that stabbed at my chest. He nodded, looking up at her with trust and love that were almost too much to bear. "I won't, Mom. I promise, Mom." The word rang in my ears, louder than the airport's din. Alex. Alexander. The name echoed in my mind as I fought to control the flood of emotions. If he was mine, I had missed everything. His birth, his first steps, his first words, moments that should have been mine to cherish, moments that I had traded for ambition and wealth. Panic surged as they moved toward the security line. They were slipping away, just as Megan had slipped from my grasp all those years ago. Without thinking, I stood, my legs moving before my mind could catch up. "Megan," I called out, my voice rough, almost desperate. She didn't turn, didn't pause. They were almost at the checkpoint now, the uniformed agents scanning tickets and ushering travelers through the metal detectors. The urgency of the moment clutched at my heart. If I didn't act now, they would disappear into the labyrinth of the airport, and I might never see them again. "Megan," I shouted louder this time, but my voice was swallowed by the bustling crowd. I came to a halt, my feet rooted to the cold tiles as I watched them fade from view. My chest tightened with a sense of loss that was all too familiar, a hollow ache where once there had been dreams and love. I had everything: money, power, success. But in that moment, I realized how meaningless it all was without the people I had abandoned. I sank back into my seat, my mind a whirlwind of what-ifs and should-haves. I couldn't let them go. Not again. But what right did I have to intrude on their lives now? After everything I had done, after the damage I had caused. The questions tormented me as I sat there, oblivious to the world around me. The bustling airport continued its dance of departures and arrivals, but I was lost in the storm that had erupted in my heart. Chapter 2. The Cold Goodbye. The memory of that day had been buried deep within me, locked away in the corners of my mind where I stored all the things I didn't want to face. But seeing Megan at the airport, with a boy who might be my son, cracked open that old wound, and the past came rushing back with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet. It was 10 years ago, but I could remember it as if it were yesterday. We had been living in a small apartment, cozy, comfortable, the kind of place that felt like home. But on that day, the walls felt like they were closing in, suffocating me with the weight of the life I was about to leave behind. I had made up my mind. I was walking away, turning my back on everything Megan and I had built together. She was in the kitchen, her back turned to me as she scrubbed the last of the dinner dishes. The slumped set of her shoulders, the way her movements were slow and tired, told me all I needed to know. We were both exhausted, emotionally, financially, in every way that mattered. And I was tired of struggling, tired of making do, of scraping by, of pretending that this was enough for me. In my hand, I held the letter I had written. It was a pathetic thing, really, just a few lines scribbled hastily, filled with cold, detached words that couldn't begin to convey the truth of what I was doing. But I didn't have the courage to say it to her face. I couldn't bear to see the pain in her eyes, the betrayal that I knew would be there. "Megan, we need to talk," I said, my voice more steady than I felt inside. She turned, wiping her hands on a dish towel, a small, tired smile on her face. "Sure, Jacob. What's on your mind?" That smile. It was the same one that had drawn me to her years ago, that had made me fall in love with her. But now, instead of warmth, it only made me feel a sharp twist of guilt in my gut. I couldn't meet her eyes. Instead, I looked down at the letter in my hand, the words blurring together as my resolve wavered. "I've been thinking a lot," I started, my voice hollow. "About us. About our life together." Her smile faltered, and a look of concern crept into her eyes. She took a step closer to me, searching my face for answers. "What do you mean, Jacob? What's wrong?" I couldn't do it. I couldn't look at her and say the words that would shatter her world. So I held out the letter instead, my hand trembling as I offered it to her. "I've written it down. It's better if you read it." Megan hesitated, her gaze shifting from my face to the letter and back again. She didn't reach for it at first, as if refusing to acknowledge the reality of what was happening. But after a moment, she took it, her fingers brushing against mine. That brief contact sent a jolt of pain through me, but I forced myself to remain still, to keep the walls around my heart firmly in place. She unfolded the letter slowly, her eyes scanning the lines. As she read, I watched the color drain from her face, her expression shifting from confusion to shock, and then to a kind of numb disbelief. "Jacob," her voice was barely a whisper as she looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. "You're leaving? You're really leaving me?" I clenched my fists at my sides, trying to keep my composure. "Megan, I can't stay here. I've met someone else, and I need to move on." The silence that followed was suffocating. Megan stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and hurt, as if trying to find some trace of the man she had loved, the man who had promised her a future. But I had shut down. I had already closed myself off, building the walls that would protect me from the reality of what I was doing. Who is she? Megan asked finally, her voice trembling. Who's the woman you're leaving me for? I hesitated, the name sticking in my throat. Her name is Hannah. She understands me. She has the connections I need to succeed. Megan's tears began to fall then, and she quickly wiped them away, as if trying to hold herself together. And what about us, Jacob? What about everything we've been through? Does that mean nothing to you? I couldn't look at her. I couldn't let myself feel the depth of the pain I was causing. It's not enough anymore, Megan. I want more. I need more. She stood there, silent and shattered, the letter crumpled in her hand. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was thick with everything that had been left unsaid, with the dreams we were letting go of, with the love we were tearing apart. Finally, Megan took a deep breath, her voice steadier than I expected. If you walk out that door, Jacob, there's no coming back. You're choosing her, and you're choosing to leave everything we've built behind. Is that really what you want? Her words cut deep, slicing through the flimsy armor I had built around myself. But I couldn't let her see that. I had to go through with it. I had to convince myself that this was the right choice, even if every fiber of my being was screaming that it wasn't. Yes, I said, my voice cold and distant. It's what I want. I could hear her soft sobs as I reached for the door handle, but I didn't turn around. I knew that if I did, I might lose my resolve, might crumble in the face of the devastation I was causing. So I opened the door, stepped into the hallway, and closed it behind me, the sound echoing in my ears like a final, irrevocable decision. As I walked away from the life we had built together, from the woman who had once been everything to me, I told myself it was for the best, that I was doing the right thing. But with every step, my heart grew heavier, weighed down by the truth I refused to acknowledge. And now, 10 years later, the ghost of that cold goodbye had returned to haunt me, more real and more painful than ever before. Chapter 3. The Shocking Truth. The days following my unexpected encounter with Megan and the boy at the airport were a haze of sleepless nights and restless days. The image of Alexander, with his dark hair and serious eyes that could have been my own, haunted me. It was impossible to push aside the gnawing suspicion that the boy was mine, that I had a son I'd never known about. I couldn't focus on anything else. The thought of Alexander, the possibility that I had abandoned not just Megan, but also our child, consumed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, replayed that fleeting moment at the airport over and over in my mind. The uncertainty was unbearable. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I hired Connor, a private detective I had worked with before. Connor was discreet, efficient, a man who dealt in facts without getting tangled in emotions. If anyone could find the truth, it was him. We met in a small, quiet cafe, a place where our conversation wouldn't be overheard. Connor sat across from me, his sharp eyes assessing me in that calm, detached way of his. Jacob, he began, his voice steady and professional. You said you needed me to find someone. What's the situation? I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice. I need you to find out about a woman named Megan and her son. I think he might be mine. Connor raised an eyebrow, but he didn't ask any unnecessary questions. He was a man who focused on the task at hand. Do you have any details? Where they live? Anything that might help me track them down? I pulled out the photo I had taken at the airport, the one I had snapped in a moment of panic and uncertainty. It was a blurry shot, taken hastily, but it was clear enough to show the boy's face, the features that had struck me with such force. That's them, I said, pushing the photo across the table. Megan and the boy, Alexander. I need to know if he's mine, Connor. I need to know the truth. Connor studied the photo for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, slipping the picture into his jacket pocket. I'll get started right away. I'll contact you as soon as I have something. As he left the cafe, I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. relief that I had handed the problem over to someone who could handle it, and dread of what he might find. The waiting was torture. I couldn't concentrate on my work, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time my phone rang, my heart leaped into my throat, only to sink again when it wasn't Connor. 3 days later, the call came. Connor's voice was as calm and composed as ever, but his words hit me like a sledgehammer. "Jacob, I found Megan and the boy," he said. "His name is Alexander, and he's 10 years old. According to the information I've gathered, he was born about 7 months after you left Megan." The world seemed to tilt around me as I struggled to process what Connor was telling me. 10 years old. That would mean Alexander was my son. My son. The realization struck with the force of a tidal wave, knocking the breath out of me. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "There's no mistake." Connor hesitated for a moment, then spoke with more weight in his tone. "Jacob, there's more. Megan raised Alexander on her own for most of his life, but she's been in a relationship with a man named Joshua for the past 2 years. They live together now." Joshua. The name felt like a punch to the gut. The thought of another man stepping into the role that should have been mine, raising my son, living with Megan, it was almost too much to bear. "Do you have proof?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Proof that he's mine." Connor was silent for a moment, then replied, "Jacob, I've seen the birth certificate. It lists you as the father. There's no doubt. Alexander is your son." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My hands trembled as I gripped the phone, trying to steady myself. The truth was out. I had a son I had never known, a son who had grown up without me, believing that another man was his father. "Jacob," Connor's voice was quieter now, more serious. "What do you want to do?" I didn't have an answer. I was overwhelmed, drowning in the shock of discovering that I had a child, and crushed by the guilt of abandoning Megan, of leaving her to raise Alexander alone. But beneath all that, there was something else, an overwhelming need to see him, to know him, to be part of his life, even if it was too late. "I need to see him, Connor," I said, my voice raw with emotion. "I need to see my son." Connor didn't question me. He simply nodded. "I'll make the arrangements. But Jacob, you need to be prepared. This won't be easy, for any of you." I knew he was right. But at that moment, all I could think about was Alexander, my son, the child I had never known, and the crushing reality that I might have already lost him. Chapter 4. The search begins. The revelation that I had a son had shaken me to my core. The truth, once buried in the past, now loomed over my present, demanding to be faced. There was no turning back. I had to see Megan and Alexander. I had to confront the life I had left behind, and somehow make amends. But the path forward was unclear, fraught with uncertainties and emotional pitfalls. I knew that I couldn't rush in without a plan, without understanding what I was up against. The last thing I wanted was to cause more pain than I already had. Connor had always been a man of few words but precise actions. If anyone could help me navigate this tangled mess, it was him. We met again, this time in a small, dimly lit office that smelled faintly of old leather and coffee. Connor sat behind his desk, his demeanor as calm as ever, as if he dealt with life-altering situations every day. "I've got the information you asked for," Connor said, sliding a thin file across the desk toward me. His voice was as composed as ever, betraying none of the gravity of the situation. "Megan and Alexander live in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. She's been working as a freelance graphic designer from home, while Joshua, her partner, runs a small marketing firm." I hesitated for a moment before picking up the file. My hands trembled slightly as I flipped through the pages, absorbing the details of Megan's life, the life she had built without me. There were photos, too. The first was of Megan, looking older but still strikingly beautiful. Her eyes, however, held a hardness, a resilience that hadn't been there before. The next photo was of Alexander, playing in a park, his expression serious yet carefree. The resemblance was undeniable. "Joshua," I muttered, barely able to say the name. "What do you know about him?" Connor leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "He seems like a decent guy. From what I've gathered, he treats Megan and Alexander well. He's been in the picture for 2 years, and by all accounts, he's committed to them." The words stung, though I had no right to feel that way. Jealousy coiled around my heart, tightening its grip with every mention of Joshua's name. The life I had walked away from had been taken up by another man, a man who had stepped in and done the things I should have done. "I need to see them," I said finally, my voice firm despite the turmoil inside. "But I don't want to just show up out of nowhere. It needs to be the right time." Connor nodded, understanding the weight of what I was asking. "I'll keep an eye on things, monitor their routine. When the time is right, I'll let you know. But Jacob, you need to prepare yourself. This isn't going to be easy for any of you, especially Megan. She's moved on, or at least, she's tried to." I sighed heavily, running a hand through my hair. "I know, Connor, but I need to do this. I need to see my son, and I need to talk to Megan, even if it's the hardest thing I've ever done." Connor gave me a long, measured look. "I'll be with you every step of the way. But just remember, this isn't just about you anymore. You're dealing with a family that's had 10 years to adapt to life without you. Don't expect everything to fall into place just because you've decided to come back." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. But I knew he was right. I had forfeited my place in their lives the moment I walked out that door 10 years ago. Now I was trying to reclaim something I wasn't sure I had the right to claim. Over the next few days, Connor provided me with updates. I learned more about Alexander's school, his interests, and his routine. He was a bright kid, excelling in his studies, and he had a passion for soccer, just like I had when I was his age. It was a bittersweet discovery, knowing that this little boy, so much like me, had grown up without any knowledge of who I was. Then there was Megan. She had built a life for herself, a life without me, and she had done a damn good job. But every time I saw a new photo of her or heard something about her day-to-day life, I couldn't help but feel the overwhelming guilt and regret. I had done this to her. I had left her to pick up the pieces. And now, here I was, trying to insert myself back into a picture I had no right to be part of. One evening, after yet another update from Connor, I found myself staring out the window of my penthouse apartment, lost in thought. The city below was a blur of lights and movement, but all I could think about was Megan and Alexander. What would they think of me? Would they hate me? Could I ever make things right? The ringing of my phone snapped me out of my thoughts. It was Connor. "Jacob," he said, his voice calm but firm, "tomorrow is the day. Megan and Alexander are planning to visit a nearby museum. Joshua won't be with them. It could be a good opportunity for you to approach them." My heart pounded in my chest. "Are you sure this is the right time?" "It's as good a time as any," Connor replied. "But remember, Jacob, this is going to be difficult. You need to be prepared for whatever reaction Megan might have." "I understand," I said, though my voice was shaky. "Thank you, Connor. I'll be there." The call ended, and I was left in the silence of my apartment, grappling with the reality of what I was about to do. Tomorrow, I would see them, Megan and my son. Tomorrow, I would face the consequences of my past decisions. As I lay in bed that night, sleep eluded me. The thought of seeing Alexander, of talking to Megan, filled me with both anticipation and dread. There was so much I wanted to say, but I didn't know where to start. All I knew was that I couldn't run from this any longer. The search was over. Tomorrow, I would finally confront the life I had abandoned, and the truth would either set me free or destroy me completely. Chapter 5. Haunted by the Past. The next morning dawned with an eerie stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. I awoke with a heavy heart, the weight of the impending confrontation pressing down on me like a boulder. Each tick of the clock seemed louder than the last, a constant reminder that time was moving forward, dragging me closer to the moment I both dreaded and longed for. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that were understated, nothing that screamed the wealth and success that had once seemed so important. I wanted to appear as a man, not as the businessman who had walked away from his family in pursuit of power and prestige. I wanted Megan to see that I was different now, that I had changed. Connor called to confirm the plan. Megan and Alexander would be at the museum around noon. I was to approach them in a public place, somewhere Megan would feel safe. This was my chance to explain, to apologize, to try to make amends. As I drove to the museum, memories of the past flooded my mind. I remembered the early days with Megan, the laughter, the dreams we had shared. We had been so young, so full of hope. I could still picture her smile, the way her eyes sparkled when she looked at me, as if I was the only man in the world. I had promised her everything, and then I had shattered it all with a single selfish decision. When I arrived at the museum, I parked the car and sat there for a moment, trying to steady my nerves. This was it. There was no turning back now. I had to face what I had done. The museum was bustling with activity, families and school groups milling about, their voices blending into a low hum. I scanned the crowd, searching for Megan and Alexander. My heart skipped a beat when I finally spotted them near the entrance to an exhibit. Megan was holding Alexander's hand, pointing at something with a gentle smile on her face. He looked up at her, his expression filled with curiosity and trust. I hesitated, my feet suddenly feeling like they were made of lead. What right did I have to approach them, to disrupt their lives? But the pull was too strong. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. Taking a deep breath, I began to walk toward them, each step feeling heavier than the last. Megan noticed me first. Her smile vanished, replaced by a look of disbelief, and then dread. She instinctively pulled Alexander closer, her body tense, her protective instincts kicking in. "Jacob." Megan's voice was sharp, laced with a mixture of shock and resentment. "What are you doing here?" "Megan," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. I needed to see you. To talk to you." Alexander looked up at me, his eyes wide with curiosity. He didn't recognize me, of course. How could he? But there was something in his gaze that made my heart ache. This was my son, the boy I had never met, never held, never known existed until now. Megan's expression hardened, her grip on Alexander's hand tightening. "There's nothing to talk about, Jacob. You made your choice 10 years ago. You left." "I know," I said quickly, desperate to keep her from walking away. "I know I did, and I regret it every single day. But Megan, please, I didn't know about Alexander. I didn't know I had a son." Her eyes narrowed, and she shook her head slowly, disbelief etched into every line of her face. "You don't get to do this, Jacob. You don't get to just show up out of nowhere and pretend that you care. You left me with nothing but a broken heart and a cold letter. And now you think you can just waltz back into our lives." Her words cut deep, each one a painful reminder of the damage I had done. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I knew she was right. I had no right to ask for anything, not after what I had done. "I'm not trying to make excuses," I said, my voice breaking. "I know I can't undo the past, but I want to make things right, if you'll let me. I want to get to know my son." Megan let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. Your son. You abandoned us, Jacob." I raised him alone. I was there for him every single day, through every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every moment of his life. "You don't get to call him your son just because you've suddenly decided to care." Tears welled up in my eyes, but I forced them back, struggling to keep my emotions in check. "You're right. You're absolutely right. I wasn't there, and I can never change that. But please, Megan, let me try. Let me at least meet him properly, even if just for a moment." Megan's expression softened for the briefest of moments, but it was quickly replaced by anger and hurt. "No, Jacob, you can't just walk in and out of his life as you please. It's too late for that. You made your choice, and we've moved on. We're happy now, without you." She turned to leave, but I reached out, my hand gently touching her arm. "Megan, please, I'm begging you. Just give me a chance. Let me explain." She pulled away from my touch, her eyes blazing with fury. "Explain? What's there to explain, Jacob? You left me. You left us. You don't get to come back after 10 years and expect everything to be fine. We don't need you. Alexander doesn't need you." Alexander, who had been silent until now, tugged on Megan's hand, looking up at her with confusion. "Mom, who is this man? Why is he talking to us?" Megan's face softened as she looked down at him, but the pain in her eyes was still there. She crouched down to his level, brushing a hand through his hair. He's someone from the past, sweetheart. Someone who made a lot of mistakes." Alexander looked at me, his innocent eyes filled with questions. "Are you a bad guy?" The words hit me like a ton of bricks. I swallowed hard, trying to find the right response. "I've done bad things," I admitted, my voice choked with emotion. "But I'm trying to be better now. I want to make things right." Megan stood up, her gaze cold and resolute. "We're done here, Jacob. Leave us alone. We've moved on, and so should you." With that, she turned and walked away, pulling Alexander along with her. I watched them go, my heart breaking with each step they took. I wanted to run after them, to beg for another chance, but I knew it was futile. The past had come back to haunt me, and now I had to live with the consequences. I stood there, rooted to the spot, as the world moved on around me. People bustled past, unaware of the emotional storm raging within me. I had lost them, Megan and my son. And the worst part was, I knew I had no one to blame but myself. As I walked back to my car, my mind was a whirl of regret, guilt, and despair. I had thought I could fix things, that I could somehow make up for the years I had lost. But now, it was clear that some things were beyond repair. The drive home was a blur. I barely noticed the cityscape passing by, my thoughts consumed by the image of Megan and Alexander walking away from me. The past had come back to haunt me, and I was left with nothing but the cold reality of my mistakes. Back at my apartment, I poured myself a drink and sat down in the darkness, the weight of the day pressing down on me. The glass felt heavy in my hand, and I stared at it for a long time before finally setting it down, untouched. The haunting realization settled over me like a shroud. I had lost them, and there was no going back. Chapter 6. A Painful Reunion. The days that followed were an agonizing blur, a haze of regret, self-reflection, and torment. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Megan's face twisted with anger and hurt, and Alexander's innocent eyes filled with questions I couldn't answer. The confrontation at the museum had left me shattered, but it had also ignited a fierce determination within me. I couldn't let this be the end. I had to try again, no matter how much it hurt. I spent hours replaying every detail of our encounter, thinking about what I could have said or done differently. But no matter how many times I went over it, the outcome was always the same. Megan walking away, taking my son with her. It was a reality I couldn't accept. I decided that I needed to see them again, but this time I would approach things differently. I couldn't force myself back into their lives. I had to show them that I was truly sorry, that I was willing to make amends, no matter what it took. Connor had been discreetly keeping tabs on Megan's movements, and he informed me that she and Alexander would be attending a community event at a local park that weekend. It was a neighborhood fair, simple, family-oriented. It seemed like the perfect opportunity to see them again, in a setting that wasn't as confrontational as the museum. When Saturday arrived, I could barely keep my hands from trembling as I drove to the park. The morning sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the ground. But I barely noticed the beauty of the day. My mind was consumed with what lay ahead. As I approached the park, I spotted them almost immediately. Megan was sitting on a blanket under a large oak tree, watching Alexander as he played nearby with a group of other children. She looked more relaxed than she had at the museum, her face softened by a gentle smile as she watched her son. It was a sight that filled me with both longing and despair. I hesitated, standing at a distance, unsure if I should approach. What if she rejected me again? What if I only made things worse? But as I watched them, I knew I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. I had to try, even if it meant facing more pain. Taking a deep breath, I started walking towards them, my heart pounding in my chest. As I drew closer, Megan noticed me. The smile vanished from her face, replaced by a look of disbelief and dread. She stood up quickly, her body tense, ready to shield Alexander from whatever I might do. "Megan," I said softly, stopping a few feet away from her. "Please, don't be afraid. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to see you and Alexander." She crossed her arms over her chest, her eyes narrowing. "Jacob, we've been through this. I told you to stay away." "I know," I replied, my voice trembling. "But I can't just walk away, not after everything. I need to try to make things right, Megan. Please, let me talk to you. Let me talk to him." Megan looked over at Alexander, who was still playing, oblivious to the tension between us. She sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging as if the weight of the world rested on them. "Why, Jacob? Why now? After all these years, why did you decide to come back?" I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. "Because I've realized how much I lost. I was selfish, Megan. I was so focused on my career, on becoming successful, that I didn't see what really mattered. And by the time I did, it was too late. I know I can't change the past, but I'm hoping that maybe, somehow, I can be part of Alexander's life." Megan's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly looked away, blinking them back. "You left us, Jacob. You left us with nothing but a broken heart and a cold letter. Do you have any idea how hard it was? How much we struggled?" I felt a deep pang of guilt, the full impact of her words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "I know, and I'm so sorry, Megan. If I could take it all back, I would. But I'm here now, and I want to do whatever I can to make up for what I did." Megan was silent for a long moment, her gaze focused on the ground. I could see the inner conflict in her eyes, the battle between the anger she still felt and the possibility of letting me back into their lives. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jacob, it's not just about me. It's about Alexander. He doesn't know you. You're a stranger to him. I understand that," I said, my voice breaking. "And I don't expect him to accept me right away. But please, Megan, give me a chance to get to know him. I'll take it slow. I'll do whatever it takes." Megan looked at me, her eyes filled with pain and uncertainty. "I don't know if I can trust you, Jacob. I don't know if I can trust you with his heart." I took a step closer, my own heart aching with desperation. "I swear to you, Megan, I won't hurt him. I won't hurt either of you. I've made enough mistakes, and I don't want to make any more. Just give me a chance. That's all I'm asking." She hesitated, her gaze flickering between me and Alexander, who was now running towards us with a wide grin on his face, holding a balloon he had just won from one of the fair games. "Mom, look. I got a balloon," Alexander exclaimed, his excitement contagious as he ran up to Megan. She smiled down at him, though the smile was tinged with sadness. "That's great, sweetheart." Alexander noticed me then, his curiosity piqued. "Who's this, Mom? Is he your friend?" Megan glanced at me, her expression unreadable, before she knelt down to Alexander's level. "This is someone from my past, Alex. His name is Jacob." Alexander looked at me with wide eyes, then back at his mother. "Is he a good guy?" Megan looked up at me, her eyes filled with unspoken words. He's someone who wants to do the right thing now. I crouched down to Alexander's level, trying to smile despite the turmoil inside me. Hi, Alex. It's nice to meet you. Alexander eyed me cautiously, then smiled back, his innocence disarming. Hi. Do you like balloons? I couldn't help but chuckle at his simplicity, even as my heart ached. Yeah, I do. Balloons are pretty cool. Megan stood up, watching us with a mixture of emotions. Jacob, I don't know how this is going to work, or if it's even possible. But for Alexander's sake, I'll give you a chance. Just one chance. Don't make me regret it. I looked up at her, my eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Megan. I promise, I won't let you down. As Megan turned her attention back to Alexander, who was now babbling excitedly about the games he wanted to play, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, and the road ahead was still uncertain and fraught with pain, but it was a start. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could find a way back into their lives. But even as I stood there, watching my son for the first time in his life, I couldn't shake the fear that it might already be too late. Chapter 7. The Price of Regret. The days that followed our tentative reunion were a whirlwind of emotions, a mix of hope and fear that left me feeling unsteady. I couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work, couldn't think of anything but Megan and Alexander. There was so much I wanted to do, to say, to somehow make up for the lost time. But the reality of the situation weighed heavily on me. 10 years of absence couldn't be erased overnight, no matter how much I wished it could be. Megan had given me one chance to be a part of Alexander's life, but I knew that this opportunity was fragile, like a delicate glass that could shatter with one wrong move. One misstep, and I could lose them both forever. The thought haunted me, gnawing at my insides like a persistent ache that refused to go away. I met with Alexander a few times, always under Megan's watchful eye. We went to the park, shared a meal at a local diner, and even visited a museum together. Each time, I saw glimpses of myself in him. The way he laughed, the curiosity in his eyes, his stubborn determination. It was both exhilarating and heartbreaking, a constant reminder of what I had missed out on all these years. But despite the small steps we were taking, I could feel the tension between Megan and me growing. She was polite, but distant, her guard always up. She was protecting Alexander, I knew that, but there was also something else, a deep-seated anger and hurt that had never fully healed. One evening after a day spent with Alexander at the zoo, I decided to talk to Megan. We stood outside her house, the sun setting behind us, casting long shadows across the front yard. Alexander had gone inside, tired but happy, leaving Megan and me alone. Megan, I began, my voice hesitant. I know things are difficult between us. I just wanted to thank you for giving me this chance, for letting me be part of Alexander's life. I know it's not easy for you. She turned to me, her expression unreadable, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. You don't have to thank me, Jacob. I'm doing this for Alexander, not for you. Her words stung, but I nodded, accepting the truth in them. I understand, but I want you to know that I'm committed to being there for him, no matter what. Megan's gaze softened slightly, but there was still a wall between us, a barrier I wasn't sure I could ever break down. You say that now, Jacob, but what happens when things get tough? When you get bored or when work takes over again? Will you just walk away like you did before? I flinched at the accusation, her words hitting me like a slap to the face. Megan, I'm not that person anymore. I know I made a terrible mistake, but I'm trying to make it right. I want to be a father to Alexander. She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. A father? Do you even know what that means? Being a father isn't just about showing up when it's convenient. It's about being there every day, through the good and the bad. You missed 10 years of his life, Jacob. You weren't there for his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. You weren't there when he needed you. And now you think you can just step in and play dad." Her words cut deep, each one a reminder of the countless moments I had missed, the memories I would never have. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my emotions in check. "I know I can't change the past, Megan, and I'll never be able to make up for what I missed. But I want to try. I want to be there for him now, in whatever way you'll let me." Megan looked away, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I want to believe you, Jacob, but it's hard. It's so hard. You broke my heart once. I can't let you do that to Alexander." I stepped closer, desperate to make her understand. "I won't, Megan. I swear I won't. I know I've hurt you, and I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but please, give me a chance to prove that I'm not going to walk away again." She stared at me for a long moment, her face a mask of conflicting emotions. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jacob, I want to believe you, but I'm scared. I'm scared of what might happen if I let you in again. Not just for me, but for Alexander. He's already been through so much." My heart ached at the vulnerability in her voice, the pain that was still so raw. I wished I could reach out and comfort her, but I knew that wasn't what she needed. What she needed was reassurance, a promise that I wouldn't break her or Alexander's heart again. "I'll do whatever it takes, Megan," I said quietly. "I'll take things slow. I'll follow your lead. Just, please don't shut me out." She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and when she opened them again, there was a resolve in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "We'll see, Jacob. We'll see if you mean what you say." With that, she turned and walked into the house, leaving me standing alone in the growing darkness. The weight of her words settled heavily on my shoulders. The road ahead was going to be long and hard, and there was no guarantee that I would succeed. As I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was teetering on the edge of a precipice. One wrong move, one moment of weakness, and everything could come crashing down. The price of my past mistakes was steep, and the cost of regret was something I was only beginning to understand. Sitting in my car, staring at the house where my son slept peacefully, I made a silent vow. I would fight for this, for him, for the family I had lost. Even if it took everything I had, even if it meant facing the pain of my own failures every single day, I would do it. Because the price of regret was too high to bear, and I couldn't afford to lose them again. Chapter 8. The Burden of Guilt. The following weeks were a test of endurance, both emotionally and mentally. Each day brought with it a new challenge, a new moment where I had to prove to Megan and Alexander, and to myself, that I was serious about being a part of their lives. But no matter how much I tried, the shadow of my past mistakes loomed over every interaction, casting doubt on my every word and action. Megan allowed me more time with Alexander, but always with a watchful eye. We visited the park regularly, where I would push him on the swings or kick a soccer ball around with him. He was a bright, energetic child, full of questions and laughter, and each time I saw him smile, it felt like a small victory. But there was always a part of me that wondered if I was doing enough, if I could ever truly be the father he needed. One afternoon, as we sat on a bench watching a group of children play, Alexander turned to me with a question that cut through my heart. "Why weren't you there when I was little?" The question was innocent enough, asked with the curiosity of a child who didn't yet understand the complexities of adult decisions. But it hit me with the force of a hammer, knocking the wind out of me. I had known this moment would come, but I wasn't prepared for the reality of it. I looked down at him, at his wide, inquisitive eyes, and felt the weight of my guilt settle heavily on my shoulders. How could I explain something so complicated, so filled with regret, to a 10-year-old? "I made a mistake, Alex," I began, choosing my words carefully. "A big mistake. I thought I was doing the right thing by leaving, but I was wrong. I hurt your mom, and I missed out on so much of your life. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Alexander frowned, trying to process what I had said. "But why did you leave? Didn't you love us?" His words were like a knife to the chest, sharp and unforgiving. "I did love you, Alex. I still do. But I was selfish. I thought I needed to be somewhere else, to do something more with my life. But I was wrong. I should have stayed. I should have been there for you and your mom." He was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the ground. I could see the wheels turning in his mind, the struggle to understand a situation that was beyond his years. "Are you going to leave again?" he asked finally, his voice small and uncertain. I felt a lump form in my throat as I shook my head. "No, Alex, I'm not going to leave again. I promise. I'm here now, and I want to be a part of your life, if you'll let me." He looked up at me then, his expression serious, far more serious than a child his age should have to be. "Okay," he said simply, as if he was giving me a chance, but only one. It was a small word, but it carried the weight of everything I was trying to rebuild. I nodded, trying to swallow the emotion that threatened to overwhelm me. "Thank you, Alex. That means more to me than you know." We sat there in silence for a while longer, watching the other children play. But my mind was far from the playground. I couldn't stop thinking about Alexander's question, about the look in his eyes when he asked if I was going to leave again. It was a look that I had put there, a fear that I had created by my own actions. The guilt was a constant companion, gnawing at me from the inside. No matter how much time I spent with Alexander, no matter how much I tried to make up for the past, there was always the nagging doubt that it would never be enough, that I had caused too much damage, that the wounds I had inflicted would never fully heal. Megan was still distant, still guarded, and I couldn't blame her. I had broken her heart once, and I knew she was protecting herself, and Alexander, from the possibility of it happening again. But it was hard not to feel the sting of her mistrust, the cold distance that seemed to grow with each passing day. I tried to talk to her about it one evening, after Alexander had gone to bed. We sat on her front porch, the night air cool and filled with the sounds of crickets and the distant hum of the city. "Megan," I began, my voice tentative, "I know I've asked for a lot of chances, and I know it's not fair to keep asking. But I need to know if there's a way forward for us. Not just for me and Alexander, but for you and me too." She looked at me, her expression weary, as if the weight of the years between us was pressing down on her. "Jacob, it's not that simple. You can't just undo what happened. You can't erase the pain, the betrayal. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. And even if I could, I don't know if I want to." Her words were honest, and they hurt, but I knew they were deserved. "I understand that," I said quietly, "but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn that trust back, if you'll let me." Megan shook her head, a small, sad smile tugging at her lips. "It's not just about trust, Jacob. It's about what's best for Alexander. He's the most important thing in my life, and I have to protect him. I can't let him get hurt." I nodded, understanding the depth of her fear. "I don't want to hurt him, Megan. I just want to be there for him, to be a part of his life. And if that means keeping things the way they are between us, then I'll accept that. But I need to know that you believe I'm here to stay." She was silent for a long time, staring out into the darkness, lost in her own thoughts. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft, almost resigned. "I believe you want to stay, Jacob, but wanting and doing are two different things. I guess we'll just have to see." It wasn't the answer I had hoped for, but it was something. A small crack in the wall that had built up between us. A glimmer of hope that maybe with time, things could change. But as I left her house that night, the burden of guilt weighed heavily on me. I had set this course in motion 10 years ago, and now I was reaping the consequences. I had to face the fact that no matter how much I wanted to make things right, some wounds might never heal, some bridges might never be fully rebuilt, and the hardest part was knowing that it was all my fault. Chapter 9. Facing the future. The days turned into weeks, and each one brought new challenges, new opportunities to either rebuild what I had lost or to see it slip further away. Alexander and I grew closer, but it was a delicate process. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Every moment with him was a mixture of joy and sorrow, of discovery and regret. Megan remained cautious, her trust hard-earned and fragile. She was kind enough to allow me more time with Alexander, but there was always a sense of distance, a reminder of the chasm I had created between us. I could see the effort it took for her to let me in, even just a little, and I knew that any misstep could send me right back to the start. One afternoon, Alexander and I were sitting in a small cafe, sharing a plate of fries and talking about his school day. He was excited about an upcoming soccer game, his eyes lighting up as he described his team's strategy. It was moments like these that filled me with both pride and a deep sadness, knowing I had missed so much of his life. "Dad, can you come to my game?" he asked suddenly, the word "Dad" slipping out naturally, without hesitation. It was the first time he had called me that, and it hit me with a force I hadn't expected. My heart swelled with emotion, but I kept my voice steady. Of course, I wouldn't miss it for anything. Alexander beamed, and for a moment, everything felt right. I could see the bond between us growing, the way he was beginning to trust me, to let me into his world. It was everything I had hoped for, but it also brought a new level of responsibility, a new pressure to live up to the role I had so carelessly abandoned years before. As the days passed, I found myself becoming more and more integrated into Alexander's life. I attended his soccer games, helped him with his homework, and took him to the movies. Each small victory brought a sense of fulfillment that I hadn't felt in years, but it also deepened the fear that I might not be able to keep it up, that I might fail him again. One evening, after Alexander had gone to bed, I found myself sitting at Megan's kitchen table. We had fallen into a routine of sorts, me spending time with Alexander during the day, and then Megan and I talking quietly in the evenings, discussing everything from school schedules to parenting decisions. It was a fragile peace, but it was more than I had ever hoped for when I first came back into their lives. "Jacob, we need to talk," Megan said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. Her tone was serious, and it immediately put me on edge. "Sure," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I've been thinking a lot about the future, about what all of this means, for Alexander, for us." My heart tightened in my chest. "I've been thinking about that too," I admitted. "I want to be here, Megan, for both of you. I want to make this work, whatever that looks like." Megan sighed, her expression conflicted. "I know you do. And I can see that you're trying, that you're committed. But I'm scared, Jacob. I'm scared of what might happen if things don't work out. I can't put Alexander through that. He's been through enough already." "I understand," I said softly. "But I don't want to run away again. I'm here for the long haul, Megan. I'll do whatever it takes to prove that to you, to him." She looked at me, her eyes filled with both hope and doubt. "That's what I'm afraid of, Jacob, that you might get overwhelmed, that the pressure might be too much. And then what? I can't let Alexander get hurt because of our mistakes." Her words were like a punch to the gut, but I knew she was right to be cautious. I had failed them both before, and I had no right to ask for anything more than what she was willing to give. "I don't have all the answers, Megan," I said, my voice tinged with desperation. "I don't know what the future holds. But I know I can't walk away again. I can't lose him, and I can't lose you." She looked away, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Jacob, you lost me a long time ago. And I'm not sure that's something you can get back." The honesty in her words cut deep, but it was the truth I had to face. The damage I had done to our relationship might be too much to repair, no matter how hard I tried. But even if I couldn't rebuild what we had lost, I could still be there for Alexander, still be the father he needed. "I know," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "But I still want to be here, even if it's just as his father. That's enough for me." Megan nodded slowly, her expression softening slightly. "I want that too for him." He needs you, Jacob, but this isn't just about what he needs. It's about what you can actually give. The weight of her words settled heavily on me. I had spent so long focused on what I wanted, what I needed, that I hadn't fully considered the reality of what I could offer. The future wasn't just about promises. It was about action, about proving that I could be the man, the father that Alexander needed. We sat in silence for a long time, the tension between us easing slightly as we both faced the uncertainty of what lay ahead. It was a moment of quiet understanding, of mutual recognition of the difficult path we were on. As I left Megan's house that night, I felt the burden of responsibility settle even more heavily on my shoulders. The road ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear. I couldn't afford to make the same mistakes again. I had to face the future with determination, with the strength to be the man my son deserved. And as I drove home, I made a silent vow to myself. I would be there for Alexander, no matter what. I would prove to Megan, to my son, and to myself that I could do this, that I could be the father he needed, the father he deserved. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of purpose, a sense of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. But it would take time, patience, and a lot of hard work. And I was ready to face it, no matter what. Chapter 10. The Promise. The weeks that followed were some of the most challenging I had ever faced, but also the most rewarding. Each day was a test of my commitment, a trial to prove that I could be the father Alexander needed, and that I could keep the promises I made to him and to Megan. There were no shortcuts, no easy answers, just hard work, patience, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Alexander and I settled into a routine. I picked him up from school a few days a week, and we would spend the afternoons together, playing soccer, working on his homework, or just talking about his day. The more time we spent together, the more I saw myself in him, not just in his looks, but in his curiosity, his determination, and even his stubbornness. One evening, as we sat on the porch of Megan's house, watching the sunset, Alexander turned to me with a question that caught me off guard. "Dad, are you going to stay forever?" The word forever hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of what it implied. It was a question I had been avoiding, a promise I wasn't sure I had the right to make, but one that I desperately wanted to fulfill. I looked into his eyes, searching for the right words. "Yes, Alex," I said softly, but with as much conviction as I could muster. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm here for you, no matter what." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my answer, and turned his attention back to the horizon. But I could see the relief in his expression, the way his shoulders relaxed just a little, as if a burden had been lifted. That moment, small as it was, felt like a turning point. It was the first time I had allowed myself to fully embrace the role of his father, to commit to being there for him, not just in the present, but in the future. It was a promise I intended to keep, no matter what challenges lay ahead. Megan, too, seemed to soften in the weeks that followed. She still kept her guard up, still maintained a distance, but there were moments, fleeting, but real, where I could see the walls she had built around herself beginning to crack. It was in the way she smiled when she saw Alexander and me playing together, or the way her voice softened when she spoke about our son. One afternoon, after Alexander had gone to a friend's house, Megan and I sat on the porch, sipping coffee and enjoying the rare quiet. "Jacob," she began, her tone serious but not unkind, "I've seen how hard you're trying. I've seen the way you've been with Alexander, and I want you to know that I appreciate it." I looked at her, surprised by her words. "Thank you, Megan. That means a lot to me." She nodded, her gaze distant, as if lost in thought. "It's not easy for me, you know, letting you back into our lives, trusting that you won't hurt him, or me again. But I'm trying." "I know," I said gently. "And I'm grateful for the chance you've given me. I know it's not easy for you." She sighed, setting her coffee cup down on the small table beside her. I want what's best for Alexander, and I know that having you in his life is a good thing. He needs his father. But Jacob, I need you to understand that this isn't just about him. It's about us too." I nodded, sensing that this was something she had been building up to for a while. "I'm listening." Megan took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for what she was about to say. "I'm not saying that things can go back to the way they were. Too much has happened, and I don't know if I can ever forgive you completely for what you did. But I'm willing to try. For Alexander's sake, and maybe for ours too." Her words hit me like a tidal wave, a rush of hope and fear all at once. This was more than I had ever dared to hope for, more than I thought I deserved. But I knew that it wasn't a promise of reconciliation, not yet. It was a tentative step forward, an opening that could lead to something more, if I handled it with care. "I want that too, Megan," I said quietly. "I know I've hurt you, and I can't take back what I did. But I'm here now, and I want to do everything I can to make things right." She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of emotions: hope, fear, uncertainty. "I don't know what the future holds, Jacob, but I think we should take it one step at a time. No promises, no expectations. Just see where things go." It was more than I could have hoped for, and I nodded, grateful for the opportunity she was offering. "One step at a time," I agreed. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation settling between us. It wasn't a resolution, but it was a beginning. A chance to rebuild, to see if we could find a way forward together, not just as co-parents, but maybe as something more. As I drove home that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace, a feeling that had been absent from my life for so long. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like there was a real possibility of redemption, of rebuilding what had been lost. The promise I had made to Alexander, to stay, to be there for him, extended to Megan as well. It was a promise I intended to keep, no matter what. I had been given a second chance, and I wasn't going to squander it. The road ahead would be long, and it wouldn't be easy, but I was ready to face it, step by step, one day at a time. Because the promise I had made wasn't just to Alexander or to Megan, it was to myself as well. I was determined to prove that I could be the man, the father, and maybe even the partner that they both needed.